Hello Space Watchers, I'm Emma, the editor-in-chief of Spacewatch Global, and this is a new episode of Space Cafe Radio, your radio channel dedicated to emerging trends and live conferences in the space sector. This radio episode has been sponsored by EU Global Action. The EU Global Action on Space is an initiative of the European Commission aiming to promote the EU space program globally and encourage international collaboration using space data and services in a broad range of domains. Our episode's guests today are Savino Rua, International Relations Officer at DG DEFIS, European Commission, and Cecilia Donati, Policy Officer Digital and Space for Development at DG INPA, again from the European Commission. Together, we had an in-depth discussion about what just happened at the New Space Africa Conference 2023. The conference was held in Abidjan on the Ivory Coast between the 26th and the 27th of April, and Cecilia and Savino summed up for us the major highlights of the conference and gave us some very interesting insights about the cooperation that is going on between Europe and Africa. So listen up and enjoy. Hello, Space Watchers, and welcome back to another episode of Space Cafe Radio. Hello, Savino, welcome.
Hello, Emma. Thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to an interesting talk about space cooperation with Africa. Thank you.
Hello, Cecilia, and welcome.
Hello, Emma. Thank you very much for your invitation to be here today in the Space Cafe.
Thank you both. It's a pleasure to have you here. So I suppose the first opening question is for both of you. Why Europe is interested in cooperating with Africa in this specific period and in this specific time?
Thank you very much for the question, Emma. Let me start by saying that Europe is interested in cooperating with Africa on space topics since a long time. Indeed, this is a partnership within the African Union and the European Union that is lasting for more than 20 years and around 200 million investment. So the EU, it's not a newcomers in this environment, but we are here supporting our partner in reaching their objective. When it comes to last week's conference, the EU was a sort of special guest to this very important gathering, high-level gathering of space actors in Africa. And we wish to thank for that reason very much the African Union Commission and the coordinator of the program GMES in Africa that allow us to be there and to share our knowledge and experience with our partners. It has been a very interesting week with a lot of discussion at all levels, from policy officer to technical to private sector. And it has been very challenging and rewarding being there on stage and hearing from our partner what are their ambition in space in the upcoming years that are growing. The reason why we were there is simply to continue our long experience in partnership with the African Union and a space ecosystem in Africa. And it's also aligned with our new strategy, the Global Gateway.
Thank you, Cecilia. Savino, how about you?
Yes, thanks, Emma, for the question. I think Cecilia has already given a very good answer, very comprehensive, but perhaps I can add a couple of points more from, let's say, my perspective. So the first point I want to mention is that I work for the organization that is essentially responsible for the European Union space program. But very important to make there is that despite being a European space program, we think that is a program that can definitely bring added value to our international partners, Africa being absolutely a key partner of strategic importance for us in Europe, especially at the moment. Therefore, I think it's very, very great indeed that you have chosen to have both of us here today at this podcast, because it is thanks to the synergies between our departments as European Commission as a whole that I think we can make a difference. Essentially, we can use the Global Gateway to promote and advance the European space program for the benefit of Africa. But overall, I think also another important point to make is that it's important that our approach to Africa is based as much as possible really on co-creation and partnership. And this is a word that obviously Cecilia already mentioned. It is actually part of the name of the department Cecilia works for. But I think partnership is really a key word I want to emphasize. The point is that together as we are trying, Europe and Africa, to co-create and co-build projects, data, services that can offer added value both to European and to African users. I think that's a very important common objective that we have there. And maybe just last point I want to make, I think at the beginning, Cecilia replied very rightly saying that our space cooperation is not starting today. We have been cooperating with Africa for quite a long time. Perhaps if we look ahead, there are some people saying that this is the century of Africa. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in terms of Afrofuturism and so on and so forth. I think it's very exciting, especially at the moment, to think of Africa as the new frontier. Also, when it comes to space, there is a lot of opportunities there. And we as Europeans, we're very glad to work together with our African partners to make space development happen in Africa for the benefit of Africans and Europeans as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Savino. So speaking about partners and new frontier and strategic cooperation, can you give us some names of countries where we as Europeans have already established cooperations or the countries that we are planning to establish a cooperation with?
This is a tricky question because to some extent we are trying as much as possible to take, how should I say, a Pan-African approach. We are trying as much as possible, for instance, to work together with African Union Commission. And why we do that? Because we believe that by having African Union as a key partner, we can have, first of all, economies of scale, and then the benefits we hope can be, let's say, can trickle down to all the different countries that form the African Union. So we try really as much as possible to take a Pan-African approach, but perhaps to try to answer your question, let me mention a few organizations and countries where I think it's interesting to emphasize the type of relationship that we have. One organization I would like to mention that I think is very close to my heart is ASECNA. ASECNA is an organization for the aviation security in Western Africa, in Madagascar, as well as in the Comoro Islands. We have a partnership agreement with them since 2018 between the European Union and ASECNA, and we're doing quite a lot of exciting work with them in order to establish a satellite-based navigation system to improve safety and security of flights in many countries in Western Africa, as well as I mentioned earlier, also in Madagascar and Comoro. So that's a kind of a key partner I'd like to mention. And ASECNA being a multinational organization, I think that's pretty interesting because we can, thanks to this relationship, work together, if you like, indirectly, perhaps, with more than 10 different African countries. Another country I wish to mention here is, I think, South Africa. It's a country with which in the past we have had space dialogue. At the moment, this dialogue is not active, but definitely that's also a very interesting partner to work with.
So speak about progresses and projects. Can you discuss with us the progresses that happen or might not have happened during the conference? Can you give us some bullet points of the most important key goals that the conference reached during these 2 days?
Thank you very much. I actually was present at the conference, and it was very much an exciting moment as well as an honor for me to be there. As I mentioned at the very beginning, the European Union was a special guest, and we were very happy and glad to be welcomed by the African Union Commission at this occasion. It was very interesting to hear all the different ambition from the different countries in terms of space ambition. So we noticed many new space agencies coming up to the floor and announce their upcoming plan in terms of SATCOM, Earth observation, satellite navigation, and other. It was very also interesting, the discussion about the recognition of the space as a game changer to achieve sustainable development goal, both in terms of environment target and sustainable goal and growth, which is really also intrinsic to our nature of doing space, so bringing value to the end user. In terms of what was announced or what was said and not said, we had the pleasure to announce our upcoming main initiative in terms of space cooperation, and it's what we call Space Cooperation Flagship in Africa. This was announced by the head of the political section of the delegation in Côte d'Ivoire, and it was welcomed very much by the different parties. This flagship is intended to build on many years of cooperation, as I was saying earlier, that we have done with the African Union and the different African institution and partner. It's really there to ensure an African ownership and to reinforce the strong institutional foundation that we have. And we really look forward to go further in the implementation and to announce even more in detail what this flagship will bring.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. So zooming out a bit from the conference, I would like to discuss with you about something that obviously is always in the air, understanding if there is already a European strategies for the cooperation with Africa. Is there some documents or regulations already in place, or you guys are still working on it? Where are we at with this process?
So at the beginning of last year, the Commission released a new communication in terms of international partnership that is known as the Global Gateway. The Global Gateway is really the framework for our cooperation outside the EU, and it's really about connecting goods, people, and services around the world in a sustainable way. And the sustainable word is really important. We're not only looking into sustainability of the different product, but we're also looking into sustainability of partnership. So the key principle that we put forward in this Global Gateway and are intrinsic to all the projects that we are establishing now, it's really about equal partnership. I do want to stress this word because I do believe that a sustainable partnership can only come when it's about a win-win situation, when it's about equal partnership. It's a new way of doing cooperation. It's really entering into partnership where all actors are welcome to the table. And when I say all actors, it's because it's not only about public sector, but it's also about involvement of the private sector, involvement of the different actors and stakeholders that are around civil society. But as I said, very much private sector as well. So the Global Gateway is Europe's offer to build a more resilient connection with the world through investment and partnership. Yet again, another time, the word partnership, because it's really key and is the core principle of the Global Gateway. And it's exactly what we are looking forward to continue doing in African context, is building on the past partnership and continuing this win-win partnership.
Thank you, Cecilia. And Savino, from more a policy point of view, which are the challenges you are facing, you as a European Union, facing in setting up a fruitful cooperation between Europe and Africa? Because, of course, all cooperation are complex, so there must be some challenges. Can you highlight some of the major ones for us?
So, of course, we know that there are challenges and it's important that we are ready to tackle them. So let me try to mention a few of them that I can, let's say, think of. One issue, for instance, that it's important to think about is regulation and governance more generally. Obviously, when you introduce new type of systems, let's say, for instance, if you introduce a satellite-based navigation system for Africa, then the question comes, what about the governance of that system? And how regulatory frameworks fit for welcoming, integrating, and working with a new satellite-based system that is coming in? So I think a very interesting but also a challenging area of work is a regulatory framework check and governance check to make sure that the rules that we have in place are fit for purpose, also in the African context, to allow the rollout, delivery, and use of space services. Another challenge I want to mention concern, let's say, generally industrial development. We need to make sure that there is an ecosystem out there that sort of is ready to make use of the data and services of space solutions. This is what sometimes we call, and I mean, it's a bit of a jargon, I guess, but this downstream market development. That's a challenge. That's a challenge because it would be really disappointing, right? If we were able, together with our African partners, to set up new amazing space services and data, and then there wouldn't be, at the end of the road, if you like, businesses, entrepreneurs, communities really taking those data, taking ththose services and using them for the benefit of ultimately the citizens of Africa and the people living in Africa. So that's also, I think, an important, definitely a challenge, the downstream market development. I would like also to mention the fact that there is also a very important issue in terms of funds and finance and, for instance, research and development funds. Obviously, we as European Union, we can bring to the table financial resources, but these are complex projects. So in general, I think a challenge is always to make sure that there is robust financing, sustainable financing to deliver what are often, indeed, as I said also earlier, complex projects that may take many years.
Thank you, Savino. Cecilia, I want to discuss the Chinese-African partnership. We have reported in January the recent establishment of a Chinese launch base in Djibouti. So I suppose I have a twofold questions. The first question is, from a space perspective, which project is Europe more interested to support in Africa? So on which specific missions and projects and capabilities you are focusing on? And the second question is, China invested a lot of money in Africa, and since they have done this earlier than us, what is your perspective on this point?
Thank you, Emma, for this very interesting and at the same time challenging question. Let me try to address two of them. So let's start from your last one. Where are we if the Chinese already arrived, basically? I think, first of all, congratulations to the Chinese that seized the opportunity of establishing a African-based launcher in Djibouti. But let me also, especially from an Italian point of view, recall that as European and Italy as well already established a spaceport in Malindi many years ago. It is true that the spaceport is not fully operational now and it's a little bit put it aside, but perhaps there is an opportunity if there is a willingness from African counterpart to do something with it. I don't know, just putting some ideas on the table. And as I said at the very beginning, Europe has been collaborating and partnering with African counterpart since more than 20 years. So I would not consider Europe a fully newcomer in the market, in the space sector in Africa. It's been more than 20 years of partnership and approximately 200 million investment along the way. So we're talking about quite some money here. And we're talking about also a long-lasting partnership, building trust within the two different counterparts. From a space perspective, is Europe more interesting in one on another topic of cooperation? I would say that all at once and none at the same time, meaning that in Europe we have one program, we have the EU space program, and this program has different components. But we decided to bring all the different components under one single program, indeed to increase also the benefit from the different user. We are witnessing more and more in our daily life how different service need different information, maybe coming from a positioning, maybe coming from an Earth observation component, maybe coming from connectivity as well. So by bringing everything under the same umbrella, we believe that we can increase the benefit from the beneficiary, which are the ultimate beneficiary, the citizen on the ground. And this is also the approach that we are bringing on the table for the upcoming space cooperation flagship in Africa that I briefly announced earlier. The flagship will bring space as a topic of cooperation. As you can see, it's not one project under one component, but rather an umbrella, a framework for cooperation with different components.
Thank you, Cecilia. Just to narrow down the last answer, I understand the principle of the big project, the big umbrella, different final meta goals, but space is huge. So I was wondering if you could give us more specific, tangible segments in the space sector when Europe is thinking to invest. You mentioned Earth observation. Savino, is there any other sectors that Europe is interested in investing besides Earth observation?
Let me try to add something here on maybe other two areas that we haven't mentioned, that she hasn't mentioned. So I think satellite navigation, that obviously has been mentioned earlier, but let me say a few more words about it. So we are definitely interested in promoting and working together with our partners in Africa, especially ASECNA, the organization I mentioned earlier in our talk, to do what? To develop and then make a reality ANGA. So what is ANGA? ANGA is the name, which I understand is Swahili. It means sky. So ANGA, or sky in Swahili, is the name of the EGNOS-based, satellite-based navigation system whose development is led by ASECNA. And we are working together with ASECNA to make this system a reality, together also with other partners that are working with us to make this happen. And that's a very specific project that is getting real. It's getting real. There is already a demo signal which is available for those that want to have a taste of how this system is going to operate. And just recently, I had the pleasure of participating to a very interesting event that took place in Nigeria, where there was a demonstration, a live flight demonstration in Abuja this February, showing the added value of ANGA. And I like to quote here our friends of ASECNA when they say that ANGA is a system that, while relying on European technology, is really an African system, which is built by Africans for the benefit of Africa. And I think that's a very important point in the general spirit of partnership that we are taking as a kind of overall motive in our talk today. Let me mention another project where I think there's going to be exciting scope for partnership with Africa. It's IRIS². IRIS² is the latest addition in the set, let's say, if you like, of EU space program components. It is a system that is going to deliver secure satellite-based connectivity, high-speed connectivity in the next years. We believe there is a tremendous potential for partnership also in this project for Africa. Africa needs in connectivity are growing, I guess, as we speak. And the offer that we can bring together with our African partners when it comes to IRIS² and secure connectivity, I think it's going to open a lot of interesting new avenues for amazing projects. ANGA, so satellite navigation, IRIS², and I don't have more examples, but I hope these are contributing to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Savino. So picking up on what you just said about the rate of which African industry is growing, we know that more players means higher traffic, more debris, more problems with traffic management. This is a problem that the big spacefaring nations have been trying to solve for a while now. How do you judge the development of this legislative side in African countries? Do you think that the African legislative bodies are moving in the same direction, matching up with what the States or Canada or Europe are doing in terms of traffic management regulation and space debris limitation?
Let me try to give you my insight. Of course, I'm not an African legislator, so I don't have in mind what is the pipeline in that sense. But I would like to remind us that as the nation, as the different countries last week in Abidjan brought on the main stage their main ambition in terms of space agency, national space agency, so did the African Union Commission. And I think I'm not revealing anything new. There is a strong commitment from the African Union Commission to establishing an African Space Agency. So there has been a signature for the inauguration of this African Space Agency will come very soon. Now we have a location. It will be based in Cairo. They have found the location and the building and so on. From what we know, the African Space Agency will work around 4 main departments or topic. So they will have, and they will be in charge, of course, to develop further the strategy, the African space strategy, that from a political point of view is already part of the Agenda 2030 and the priority set in that respect. So the African Space Agency will work under, as I was saying, around the 4 main topics, these being Earth observation, satellite navigation, telecommunication, and space exploration, astronomy, and so on. So I do believe that this is a very good sign also in terms of their willingness to engage also at global levels. Let us remember that they are coming into this new environment, and we should also give them the right, as we did, to access space and not to impose any decision, but to come to a conclusion that it's beneficial for mutual partner in a consensus way. I think that, again, this reflects the partnership approach, the win-win situation, that imposing but looking for solution together. This is, I believe, very important.
Thank you, Cecilia. So moving on to the next topic. In the last year, we saw the rise of private space investments everywhere, in the US, in Europe, in Asia. Where is Africa in this game? Do you see private investments in Africa? And of course, is Europe also participating to these investments? Is Europe financing some private ventures in Africa? If yes, which type of projects we are trying to set up?
Thank you again for this very interesting question. I think we all know that Africa space sector is growing very fast. The Africa space economy in 2021 was valued almost $20 billion and is projected to continue growing strongly. Therefore, of course, there is a lot of interest from different private sector investors to come and play a role in Africa, which, by the way, is also the key element of our Global Gateway strategy, what I was mentioning before. So investment also should come from the private sector. And the idea of the Global Gateway is something that is called Team Europe. So we are really teaming up in the different key actors, whether they are public actors, so whether it's a commission and the member state, but also the private sector, to reach the objective, especially in those sectors like digitalization, like space, where the need for investment is very high. And so the public money cannot bridge and cannot cover until what we call the last mile. So it's also true that attracting a European investor in Africa sometimes is not the easiest thing. So perhaps we need to work further in establishing links and bringing and building bridges across the two continents and across the two private sector components. Let's say last week, again in Abidjan, we have organized a seminar that it was really looking into establishing a partnership from a private sector point of view. We have noticed a lot of interest from both parties, and sometimes it's really also a matter of knowing what opportunities they are, knowing which door to open, and knowing how to access a market. So our role, I think, is there as a public sector, is there really to facilitate the establishment of this partnership between Europe and Africa, but at the same time also facilitate and support the development of an African ecosystem. And if you remember, I mentioned that one of the pillars of our upcoming initiative, it's really building on the private sector. So we really think that data is key in this in our economy, what we call data economy. So we are really aiming to develop action that support data-driven economy and innovation-led society by developing services that are adapted to specific need. It can be, for instance, a service supporting precision agriculture. It can be a service supporting smart mobility or, port management. You can really name it, because we can go from water, climate change, biodiversity, urban planning, more smart transport system, where the private sector can really play a role.
Thank you, Cecilia. So picking up on something that you said, my last question, you mentioned a very important word, that is data economy. Let me contextualize this. We had the chance to contact some of our African experts regarding the type of relationship that the EU is trying to build and negotiate in Africa. And some of them expressed some skepticism because somehow they sense that the relationship has been structured in a way they do not approve completely. One of the first points is something that you guys have already addressed. They perceive it like more of a donor-recipient relationship rather than an equal relationship. The second point they mention is that they perceive that the African resources has been somehow cut off from the deal. So it's just a kind of like European Commission, African Union discussion, and the private sector, the local private sector, have been cut off of the deal. And last but not least is exactly what you just said. They perceive that the deal that is being developed is more about using and controlling African data instead of helping them to develop their own structure. How do you respond?
Yeah. Maybe I can start, and then I'm sure Cecilia also has some interesting thoughts to share about this question, Emma. I think this is not just a question. You ask several sub-questions, if you like. I just want to start by some comments about the private sector. I think it's absolutely crucial for us that there is a clear and robust involvement of the African private sector in our overall space partnership with Africa. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. Just the conference that we mentioned earlier, the one in Abidjan, the New Space Conference, that was a conference where you had a very interesting and massive involvement of the African private sector. You had the entrepreneurs there, you had the startups there, you had the investors there. And we were there as well, together with, of course, our partner that kindly invited us there of the African Union Commission. And while I don't know what they would say, I'm pretty sure that also our African partners, they would agree that involvement of the African private sector is crucial if you want to make our space partnership a success. Now, let me give you something more concrete. We have a very exciting project ongoing, which is the Global Action on Space. The Global Action on Space is an initiative that we have taken as European Commission to do what? To promote the added value of the EU space program beyond Europe. We have a lot of events going on in Africa. The EU Global Action on Space also was helping us definitely to be there and be present in the New Space Conference in Abidjan. And I think it's interesting that the EU Global Action on Space has a specific angle, which is about business coaching. And at the moment, the highest number of companies that want to receive business coaching and want to be, let's say, active and find partnership with our European companies, they come from Africa. We have 27 companies that have been registered for business coaching. They're all from the private sector. They represent different countries, from Kenya, Namibia, Nigeria. I'm not going to mention all of them, but I think this is very interesting because, first of all, it signals our commitment to have the private sector very much, let's say, very much involved when it comes to space partnership for Africa, but it also signals the interest, the passion, and the determination of the African entrepreneurs that see the value of the space data economy and want to play not a passive role there, but want to play a very active role in the process. Now, I think Cecilia may have something more to add, but I just want to come back to the initial point of your question about, let's say, the skepticism or some, how can I say, some comments that came from the experts, African experts you talked to. Again, I think we are keen to move away from this assistance or donor-based approach and to move away from that and move towards a dimension of co-creation and partnership. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be done just by talking, of course. It will depend on the actions, but I think rest assured of our commitment to make it happen and to build a partnership-based approach for space cooperation with Africa. Now, I think, Cecilia, you may want to add something more.
Thank you, Savino. Yes, I mean, you already mentioned it very clearly, our intention of moving away from the donor-recipient relationship, but building, again, an equal partnership. And this has to come from two sides. It cannot be only from the intention of one side, but it should be the intention of the two sides. And I think this was confirmed yet again another time last week in Abidjan, where all parties were very interested about this idea of building together or working together and having an equal relationship rather than a top-down approach or a donor-recipient. And this also applies to your last point about controlling African data. I think in Europe, especially in the Earth Observation Program, it is very clear that it's a free and open policy. Everybody can access it. It's a program that is looking around the globe and it has a strong focus on Europe as well. But regardless of that, the idea is not to produce data on behalf of anybody else, neither develop a capacity or being the one in the lead. On the contrary, the idea that we want really to push forward is that if needed, we are there to support the development if we can have a win-win partnership approach, which means in essence is that if there is, we are sure that there is something to be gained by both parties, knowledge of the local ecosystem. It's really not possible to think that we can run a service from Europe for Africa. We are lacking about the knowledge, the local culture, the local ecosystem, the environment, the policy aspect. So it has to come from Africa, the solution to address African needs. And also in terms of controlling African data, this is not at all what we are looking into it. As I said, the other way around is really like sharing data, sharing knowledge as we are sharing the data of the Copernicus program through our data arrangement with the African Union Commission is really to look into a win-win partnership. And we have seen that the global model are also benefit from more data. So there is a win-win benefit to enter in this partnership.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Savino, for being here with us. I think that was the end of our interview. And I'm looking forward to discuss with you this very interesting topic again and see how the relationship between Europe and Africa progress. So I will talk to you again soon. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
If you want to keep the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.spacewatch.global. Subscribe to our newsletters, and of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Emma Gatti, Editor-in-Chief at Spacewatch Global, your independent perspective on space. See you next time. Ciao.